In the middle of JFK Airport, a shocking scene stopped people in their tracks. Dr. Alana Brooks, a high-ranking black intelligence official, was handcuffed by two white officers without cause. She didn't resist. She didn't shout. She stood firm, eyes locked on the men abusing their power. Why? Because to them, a black woman in an expensive suit looked too confident. They didn't ask questions. They made assumptions, but they had no idea who she was, or the storm that was about to hit them. This isn't just her story. It's a warning. Subscribe now for more true stories that reveal the truth. She had always believed in the law. Always believed that justice, no matter how slow, would find its way. But on that cold morning at JFK Airport, Dr. Alana Brooks realized that even after 2 decades of serving her country, her skin color was still seen as a threat. The moment those cold handcuffs snapped around her wrists, everything she'd worked for seemed to shatter into pieces. She had shown them her credentials, real, official, undeniable, but they mocked her, laughed at her, and whispered to each other like children playing a cruel game. She tried to remain calm, tried to explain, but her words felt invisible. And when she told them to check her identity, they scoffed. Sure, a black woman dressed like that? Please. Alana's heart pounded, not out of fear, but out of the rage that builds when you've done everything right and still get treated like a criminal. She knew she had to act, to push back, to make them see they were wrong. But every time she raised her voice, they twisted her words into aggression. Every movement she made, they called it resisting. She thought of running, just breaking free and sprinting to someone, anyone, who would listen. But her instincts told her that one wrong move could cost her everything. One wrong step, and they'd claim she was a threat. One wrong breath, and she could end up on the ground. So she did what she thought would save her. She used her voice. "Check my ID," she said again, louder this time, her voice trembling from the storm she held back. But they didn't check. They only tightened the cuffs. A small crowd began to form, people whispering, some pulling out phones. She looked at the strangers' faces, silently begging someone to step in. But no one did. Not yet. One officer shoved her shoulder. "Let's go," he snapped, dragging her forward like she was a thief caught red-handed. The humiliation burned. She wasn't just being arrested. She was being erased. In that moment, she wasn't a doctor, wasn't a federal agent, wasn't a woman who had saved lives and risked hers countless times. She was just another black suspect to them. And even though she tried to stand tall, her legs felt heavy, like the weight of every injustice she had ever faced was pulling her to the ground. Alana's mind raced as they marched her toward a holding room near the terminal. She searched for cameras, for any sign that someone was recording. She needed the world to see. This couldn't be another story buried in silence. But even as she tried to fight back with her voice, her eyes, her presence, nothing changed. The officers joked as they walked. "Probably stole that suit," one of them whispered. "They always get cocky when they think they're somebody." Every word was a stab, and she felt each one like a wound she couldn't stop bleeding. Still, she didn't cry. Not yet. She couldn't let them win like that. Inside the holding room, they forced her to sit in a metal chair with her hands still cuffed behind her. The room was cold, gray, lifeless, like a cage built for people who didn't matter. Alana's wrists ached, her shoulders throbbed, her pride was in pieces. But the worst pain came from knowing this wasn't new. She had seen it happen to others, on TV, in the news, sometimes in her own investigations. But now, she was living it. She closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. "You're not broken," she told herself. "You're still you." Then, finally, a voice from outside, a different one, Someone asking questions. A man, older, steady, familiar. He walked in and looked at her, eyes wide with shock. "Dr. Brooks?" he said quietly. It was David Reynolds, an airport official she had met years ago at a federal training conference. Recognition dawned on his face like the sunrise. He turned to the two officers, his voice sharp. "Do you have any idea who this is?" They laughed at first, rolled their eyes. But then something changed. A voice buzzed over the radio. Their superior was calling. He had received a report. An FBI agent detained. "Confirm identity now." One officer sighed, like it was all just an inconvenience. He pulled out his phone and typed in her ID. The screen lit up. His jaw dropped. His hands shook. Alana watched them change, watched their arrogance melt into fear. They fumbled with the cuffs, tried to explain. "We didn't know. It was just protocol." But she didn't respond. She just looked at them, her silence heavier than any scream. The video from someone in the crowd had already hit social media. People were angry, rightfully so. Within an hour, investigators arrived. The officers were pulled aside, their badges taken. Their superior spoke to them with disgust, calling their actions shameful, racist, inexcusable. They were suspended. Later, they would be fired. But Alana didn't feel victorious. Not yet. She felt tired. Hollow. The kind of pain that doesn't go away with justice. The kind that stays in your bones. In the days that followed, her story went viral. News channels reached out. Activists rallied. People from all over the country wrote messages of support. But still, she wondered, how many others didn't get cameras? Didn't get justice? Didn't get out? She spoke at forums, gave interviews, but her voice always circled back to one truth. This isn't about me. It's about the system that made this happen. She kept working. She kept speaking. She kept fighting. And every time she walked through an airport after that, her heart beat faster. She still wore her suit, still held her head high, but deep down, she knew. One wrong look, one hateful officer, and it could happen all over again. Her story didn't end in that room. It began there. And if you made it this far, know this. Her fight isn't over. And neither is ours. Subscribe to this channel to hear the stories they don't want you to see. The stories that matter. Tomorrow, we'll tell another one. She sat in silence, the hum of city traffic barely audible through the glass walls of her office. The skyline of New York stretched beyond the windows, but Dr. Alana Brooks didn't see it. All she saw was that cold gray room in JFK Airport, the one where she had been handcuffed like a criminal, treated like she was nothing more than a threat in a nice suit. Her wrists still bore the faint red marks from the cuffs days later. No amount of lotion could soothe the pain beneath the skin. It wasn't just physical. It was the kind of pain that rooted itself deep inside, where pride and identity lived. The kind of pain that whispered in the dark, "You don't belong here." After the incident went viral, the world reacted, but not all in her favor. Yes, there was outrage. Yes, many people supported her. But beneath every supportive post, there were others. Cruel comments, gaslighting remarks. She must have done something. She probably had an attitude. Another race card being played. Alana read them all. She knew she shouldn't, but she did. Every word was like a fresh slap to the face. She had done everything right. She had stayed calm, shown her ID, followed the law. But none of it mattered to those who already believed she was guilty the moment they saw her skin. The days after were a blur. Meetings, interviews, calls from superiors who offered shallow apologies and formal concern. "We're deeply troubled," they'd say. "We stand with you." But standing with someone is different from standing for something. And when the cameras turned off, many of them went back to business as usual. Even inside her own agency, whispers began. People questioned if she had handled the situation professionally. One colleague even asked if she might have unintentionally provoked the officers. It crushed her. She thought the worst was over once the officers were fired. But what came after the subtle doubt, the quiet distrust, the sideways glances in meetings, was almost worse. She was no longer just Dr. Alana Brooks, the respected agent with a spotless 20-year record. She was the woman from the airport video, the one who went viral, the one who caused a scene. Some treated her like a hero. Others treated her like a liability. She tried to keep working. She threw herself into her cases. Financial crimes, cartel connections, internal corruption. These were the things she knew. These were the things she could control. But even there, the fallout followed her. In one high-level meeting, a deputy director spoke over her 3 times as she presented. When she confronted him after, he smiled and said, "I just assumed you weren't finished preparing your slides." Her hands clenched so tight, she felt her nails dig into her palms. She didn't go home much anymore. Her apartment was too quiet, too empty. Her mother had passed years ago, and she had no siblings. Her only family had been the bureau, and now that family was fraying around her. She stopped calling her few close friends. She didn't want to burden them. She didn't want to hear pity in their voices. Instead, she worked late, slept at her desk sometimes, ate alone, laughed less. Then the hate mail started. It began with 1 letter, typed, unsigned. "You think you're special? You're not. You're just another angry black woman looking for attention." Then came the emails, the messages, the threats. Some were vile, others subtle. But they all had one thing in common. They didn't see her as a person. Just a problem. Just a symbol. The FBI increased her security detail, but no amount of security could protect her from the ache that grew in her chest each morning. She began waking up with a weight pressing on her rib cage. She couldn't breathe right. Her doctor called it anxiety, prescribed something. She took it. It dulled the edges but didn't heal the wound. One night she sat in her car outside a community center where she was scheduled to speak on justice reform. The building was full. People were waiting. But she couldn't move. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She thought of the video, the cuffs, the smirks on those officers' faces. And worse, she thought of how easily it could have ended differently. What if she had flinched? What if she had raised her voice? What if no one had recognized her? What if she had died? Tears slipped down her cheeks before she even noticed. She wiped them away quickly, but her chest heaved. This wasn't strength anymore. It was survival, and she was tired of surviving. Still, she stepped out of the car, wiped her face, straightened her back, walked in. The applause was loud, but she couldn't feel it. She looked into the crowd, dozens of young black men and women. Some wore "Justice for Alana" t-shirts. One girl in the front row looked at her like she was magic. Alana forced a smile, but inside, she felt hollow. She spoke anyway. "I didn't ask to become a symbol," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "But here I am. Not because I did something extraordinary, but because I dared to walk through an airport wearing a suit and confidence while being black." There was silence, then a few claps, then more, then a standing ovation. She stood there, blinking back tears as the crowd roared for her. But she wasn't celebrating. She was mourning. For herself, and for everyone who never got a second chance, who never got a crowd, who never got to speak their truth. Afterward, a young man approached her quietly. He said his brother had been killed during a wrongful arrest. He said seeing her fight gave him hope. Alana nodded, but when she got home that night, she cried harder than she ever had. Because she was tired of being someone else's hope. She just wanted to live, to be respected, to be seen. But the world didn't let her rest. Months later, she testified in a federal hearing on police misconduct. Her words were sharp, measured, powerful. Senators praised her. News outlets quoted her. But still, she felt like she was screaming into a storm. She knew reform took time. But how many people would have to be broken in the process? One morning, she walked into a cafe, and the barista whispered, "Thank you for what you're doing. You make me proud." Alana smiled politely. But the truth? She didn't feel proud. She felt like she was holding up a building with her bare hands, while the world watched and clapped. But no one came to help. And yet, she kept going. Because she knew that if she stopped, they'd win. The ones who wanted her silenced. The ones who wanted her erased. The ones who believed that a black woman with power was a mistake. She returned to her office late one evening, after another long day filled with interviews, paperwork, and stares. She looked out at the city again. This time, she let herself feel it. The pain, the betrayal, the exhaustion, but also the fire. It still burned, even under the weight, even through the tears. Alana Brooks hadn't asked to be a warrior, but they made her one, and she would not back down. Because her story was no longer just hers. It was a mirror for a country still struggling to see itself clearly. A reminder that even when you wear the badge, even when you've earned every title, there are people who will still see you as less than. But she had one final message. For them, and for the world. You will not silence me. If you've made it this far, don't let her stand alone. Subscribe now. Because tomorrow's story may be yours, and stories like Alana's must be heard. She stood at the podium, lights in her eyes, cameras aimed like weapons, and a room full of powerful people waiting to hear her speak. But all Dr. Alana Brooks could hear was the echo of those cuffs closing around her wrists. It had been months since the airport incident, yet the memory lived in her like a shadow, following her every move, whispering in her ear in moments of stillness. They said she was brave. They said she was strong. But behind every article, every speech, every smile she forced in public, there was a pain so deep, so raw, it nearly broke her in private. Because when the microphones turned off and the lights faded, she was left alone with the truth. She was tired. Tired of always being the one who had to fight. Tired of always carrying the weight of injustice on her back. Tired of holding in tears when all she wanted was to collapse and scream. Yet she kept standing. That night, as she looked into the eyes of senators and leaders at the National Justice Summit, her voice did not shake. It was steel, forged in humiliation, injustice, and the fire of everything she had endured. What happened to me at JFK Airport, she began, her voice echoing through the silent hall, was not an isolated mistake. It was a symptom of a system that has failed to see black people as fully human. I was handcuffed like a criminal in broad daylight for doing nothing wrong. I was insulted, humiliated, and dismissed, not because of anything I did, but because of everything I am. The room didn't move. Some held their breath. Others shifted uncomfortably. But Alana didn't stop. And if it could happen to me, an FBI official, someone with credentials, power, protection, then what happens to those with no title, no audience, no backup? She could feel the heat rising in her throat, the sting behind her eyes. But she didn't let it show. She pressed forward. I've spent my life chasing justice, believing in it, defending it. But what happened to me that day, what continues to happen to people of color across this nation, makes one thing clear. The justice system doesn't need more defenders. It needs transformation. Applause broke out. But it didn't warm her. She stepped away from the podium and walked backstage, her steps heavy. No one saw the way her hands trembled. No one saw her duck into the green room and sit down, clutching the edge of the table as if it were the only thing holding her together. It had been too much. Too many interviews. Too many speeches. Too many nights lying awake, replaying every second of that encounter. She had survived. But at what cost? The truth was, she hadn't been the same since. She flinched at loud voices, felt her heart race when she saw security guards glance her way. Some nights, she still woke up gasping for air, her hands clawing at imaginary cuffs. Therapy helped. A little. But even her therapist didn't fully understand what it felt like to be treated like a threat for simply walking with confidence. And then there was the silence. The deep, aching silence that waited for her when she got home. She lived alone. Always had. The job never allowed much room for personal life. But now that silence became unbearable. No partner to hold her. No one to say, "You don't have to be strong tonight." She would make dinner and not eat it. Sit in the dark. Read hateful comments online from strangers who said she was overreacting, who called her a liar, who said, if she'd just obeyed, none of this would have happened. She read those words even though she knew she shouldn't. She read them because they hurt, and because part of her still needed to understand how people could be so blind to suffering. But what broke her most wasn't the hate. It was the indifference, the silence from those she once called colleagues. Some hadn't called since the day it happened. Some avoided her eyes in hallways. Some believed her but were too scared to stand beside her. And that loneliness, that betrayal, it cracked something inside her that may never heal. One night, she returned to the very airport where it all began. Not for a speech, not for work, just to see if she could face it. She wore the same suit, the same heels, walked through the same terminal. Her heart pounded with every step, but she didn't stop. She paused near the baggage claim, the place where it all began. Closed her eyes, took a breath. And then she saw them. Two black teenage girls watching her from a distance, whispering to each other. One approached nervously. "Are you Dr. Brooks?" she asked. Alana nodded, surprised. The girl smiled wide. "You don't know me, but you give us hope. Thank you for fighting back." That moment cracked something open in her, not pain, but light. It reminded her why she kept going, and it's why she's still here. Not because she's unbreakable, but because she refuses to be broken without meaning. She keeps telling her story, keeps demanding justice, keeps walking back into rooms that tried to erase her. Because someone has to. Because silence helps the oppressor. Because every time she speaks, another person finds the courage to stand. But she can't do it alone. If her story moved you, even a little, click the like button. Not for the algorithm, not for the attention. Do it to show her she's not alone. Every like is a voice saying, "We see you, Alana. We believe you. We stand with you. Because when the world tries to silence someone who speaks the truth, the worst thing we can do is stay quiet, too. This isn't just her fight. It's all of ours. And the more we stand beside her, the stronger she becomes. So don't scroll away. Press that like button. Leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel. Let's flood her story with the support she deserves. Let's remind her, and every person who's ever felt powerless, that their voice does matter, because courage is contagious. And Dr. Alana Brooks? She's fighting not just for herself, but for you. It started like a rumor whispered through locked doors, a name spoken in hushed tones inside federal buildings where silence usually ruled. Dr. Alana Brooks. Once the respected symbol of resilience and justice, now the question on everyone's mind: what did she do? No one could say for certain. The whispers were loud, but the facts? Buried. One thing was clear. Alana had disappeared, vanished from public view after months of passionate speeches, interviews, courtroom testimonies, and sleepless nights spent trying to reform a system that had broken her once and still bore down on millions more. After her airport incident and the firestorm that followed, she had become a lightning rod, loved by some, feared by many, and quietly targeted by more than a few. But now, she was gone. No press, no statements, no social media. The woman who had stood unshaken before senators and marched through a sea of cameras had vanished like smoke. The last known photo of her was blurry, snapped at the edge of a parking garage at 2:13 a.m., her coat drawn tight, eyes scanning the darkness like she knew she was being watched. And she was. Alana had learned things, dangerous things. After being racially profiled and nearly destroyed by the very system she served, she began to dig, quietly, methodically, not just into airport protocols or local police misconduct, but deeper, beneath the surface of law enforcement databases, into encrypted files most people didn't even know existed. And what she found terrified her. Secret networks of protected officers with long histories of abuse, hidden financial trails connecting politicians to for-profit prison systems, surveillance programs targeting activists and black leaders under the guise of public safety. And then something darker, a name, repeated again and again in redacted files. Project Halberd. She didn't know what it was at first. No one did. It wasn't listed on any federal funding record. It wasn't connected to any known department, but it kept showing up, attached to case files that vanished, whistleblowers who were silenced, and evidence that never made it to court. And when she asked questions, doors began to close. Friends stopped returning calls. One night, her laptop froze and displayed nothing but a white screen with a single sentence in block letters: "Stop digging." But Alana couldn't. Not now. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about why she had been handcuffed in the first place. It was about the pattern. What if her arrest wasn't just two racist cops making a mistake? What if it was intentional? She began connecting dots. Cases of powerful black officials suddenly discredited, arrested, or conveniently removed from leadership. Judges, activists, detectives. She found a sealed file referencing an exposure protocol and the term containment by embarrassment. And then, one night, while reviewing documents in her home, her power cut out. Her phone went dead, and a black SUV idled at the corner of her street for 20 minutes. That's when she packed a bag and vanished. Some say she fled to Canada. Others believe she's working undercover inside the system, wearing a different name, feeding secrets to journalists and reform groups. A few even whisper that she's gathering names, a list of those who orchestrated Project Halberd, and planning something bold, something dangerous, something unbelievable. But the question remains, what is she doing now? What lines has she crossed? Because here's what we do know. 2 weeks after her disappearance, a major server inside a Homeland Security data vault went offline for 11 hours. When it returned, thousands of files were missing. A known FBI mole was found dead in a motel room outside D.C., with a burner phone and a single file left open on the screen. Dr. Alana Brooks, threat level black. No one claimed responsibility, but a week later, a voice recording began circulating on encrypted activist channels. A woman's voice, calm, unshaken, familiar. If you're hearing this, I'm still breathing. But don't look for me. Not yet. The truth is bigger than all of us, and they'll do anything to bury it. I need time, I need space, and I need you to be ready. Because when I come back, it's not for speeches. It's for justice. The file was immediately scrubbed from the web, but not before it was downloaded, re-uploaded, and dissected by thousands. That was 3 months ago. Since then, 4 high-profile resignations have rocked multiple government agencies. One private security firm with deep ties to federal contracts mysteriously shut its doors. And someone has been leaving sealed envelopes at independent newspapers around the country, each one containing evidence that was previously sealed, doctored, or erased, each one pointing to the same thing. Project Halberd was real, and someone is pulling its strings. But who? And is Alana still alive? Some say she's hiding in plain sight. Shaved her head, changed her name, joined the staff of a senator sympathetic to reform. Others say she's off the grid entirely, protected by a network of insiders who believe in her mission. One theory even claims she's taken refuge with a former intelligence agent who once helped expose corruption in the CIA and has the resources to keep her safe. But no one knows for sure. All we know is this. If Dr. Alana Brooks is planning something, it's not small, it's not safe, and it's not legal, because the things she's fighting against, they don't play by the rules. And if she wants to stop them, neither can she. So here we are, waiting, watching, hoping. Because if she pulls this off, if she really comes back with proof, with names, with everything, it could unravel the very foundation of institutional corruption in this country. It could finally expose the racism hidden not just in airport terminals, but in databases, courtrooms, budgets, backdoor deals, and national policy. It could bring down empires, but it could also destroy her. So now we ask you, not just as a viewer, but as a person who still believes in truth, justice, and what's right. What would you do? If you were her, would you risk your life, your freedom, your name to reveal the truth? Would you run headfirst into a machine designed to crush you? Would you stay hidden? Or would you come back with fire in your eyes and a folder full of secrets that could change the world? Leave a comment below. Tell us, Alana, we believe in you. Tell her the world is still watching. Tell her she's not alone, because no matter how far she's gone or what she's about to do, she needs to hear us now. Click like to show your support. And subscribe, because when Alana Brooks returns, you'll want to be here when the truth finally comes out. It began with silence. An absence so loud it echoed through every hallway she used to walk. Dr. Alana Brooks, once a household name after her unjust arrest at JFK Airport, had vanished. No press release, no farewell, no resignation. Just gone. To the public, she had been a powerful symbol of resilience, the black FBI official who stood tall against the system that tried to crush her. But to those inside the federal walls, she was more than just an icon. she was a threat, and perhaps that's why she disappeared. Because what most didn't know, what the public couldn't possibly imagine, was that Alana had seen something she wasn't supposed to. It started after the airport incident, when her name became a spark for national outrage. While the media moved on, Alana didn't. She dove deeper, not just into the circumstances surrounding her profiling, but into the inner mechanisms that allowed such abuse to go unchallenged. She began investigating policies, databases, and communication logs tied to police oversight and misconduct. And that's when she stumbled upon a sealed program file simply labeled S for Echo. No agency markings, no authors, no metadata, just a date, 15 years ago, and a list of redacted case numbers linked to terminated officers, whistleblower suppression, and one chilling label: Internal Neutralization Protocol. She tried to access more, but her clearance denied her entry. That's when she knew. This wasn't just a rogue system flaw. This was designed. Someone, somewhere, had created a covert framework inside the justice system to protect certain individuals, silence dissenters, and manipulate outcomes. But when she brought it up in a closed meeting with her superiors, they brushed it off. "You're emotional," one of them said. "Still dealing with the trauma." Another added, "Maybe take some time off, let it go." But Alana couldn't, because she knew what she had found wasn't just corruption, it was coordination. Patterns of cases being dropped, records being wiped clean, officers reassigned with new identities. And worse, victims who tried to speak out mysteriously vanished from media coverage, or in some cases from life altogether. She began working alone. Alana spent weeks tracing the files from public terminals, encrypted VPNs, using dead drops and proxy locations to avoid detection. Every time she got close to a connection, the trail would disappear, or her access would be revoked. Then one night, after presenting her findings to an independent oversight committee, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but her walls had been torn apart. Her locked drawers were pried open, her private files gone. She came home to the message, "Enough," etched onto her mirror in red marker. That night, for the first time in years, Alana felt real fear. Not just for her job, not just for her reputation, but for her life. Still, she didn't stop. She went underground, using an old network of activists, retired agents, and journalists she had once helped protect. They told her to disappear, to vanish like so many others had. But Alana had something they didn't. A backup drive hidden in a safe house across the river. Contained within it were partial files, interview transcripts, surveillance images, and recordings of phone calls between officials, discussing how to contain voices like hers. But getting to it wouldn't be easy. One afternoon, as she crossed a pedestrian bridge to retrieve the drive, she noticed two men behind her. Same coats, same shoes, same rhythm in their steps. She broke into a jog, turned sharply down an alley, and looped around the block. When she reached the safe house, her hands trembled as she unlocked the basement door. The air was musty. Dust rose with every step. She found the box behind an old heater, exactly where she'd left it years ago, but as soon as she turned to leave, she heard footsteps above. She froze. The wood creaked. Voices whispered. They had followed her. She crawled through the back vent, heart pounding, boots scraping metal. She didn't stop running until she reached the edge of the East River. There, she climbed into an old fishing boat owned by an old friend, a retired informant named Luis, who owed her a favor. As the boat pulled away into the fog, Alana curled into herself, the drive clutched tight in her coat. Her lungs ached. Her hands bled. Her mind raced. She was now officially off the grid. The days that followed blurred. She hacked into offline servers from borrowed laptops. She sent fragments of the drive to various contacts in the media. But the media was scared. "It's too big," they said. "We can't run this without verification." One editor admitted her newsroom had received a warning from a federal consultant the day before Alana's files arrived. "If we publish, we're next," she said. Even her allies were going silent. Her resources were vanishing. Her name, once on headlines, was now associated with controversy. Government officials claimed she had become unstable, a rogue agent, a security threat. They planted stories, manipulated interviews, leaked pieces of her past to paint her as erratic. She watched in silence as the world turned its back. But then, something happened. An anonymous video surfaced online. Grainy footage, time-stamped 3 years ago, showing a secret meeting between high-ranking officials in a hotel basement. No media present. No public record. In the video, one man says, "We neutralize them early, before they rise too high. We use policy, pressure, or we let the local units handle it. Quietly." That was all the public needed. The video went viral. Suddenly, people were asking questions. The term Project Halberd trended on social media. Hashtags flooded timelines. Protesters held up signs with Alana's face again. Whistleblowers stepped forward, emboldened by the wave of attention. But Alana, she stayed in the dark. Because she knew one thing. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She sent one final message through an encrypted feed, addressed not to the public, but to the few who still believed in truth. "If you're hearing this," she said, her voice calm but worn, "then the worst has happened. But I'm not gone, not really. I've given you the pieces. You have the power now. I couldn't fix the system alone. But maybe, just maybe, I've cracked it enough for light to get in. Keep pushing, keep watching. And if they ever ask why I did it, tell them I saw what they tried to hide. And I couldn't walk away. No one has seen her since. Some say she's dead. Others say she lives abroad under a new identity, watching the news from a distant village. But a few believe something else. They say she's still here, in the shadows, planning something bigger than ever. That the files she leaked were only phase 1. That the real storm hasn't started yet. And when it does, it won't be quiet. It'll be the reckoning. Because Dr. Alana Brooks didn't run, she repositioned. And if she comes back, it won't be to ask permission. It'll be to finish what she started. The question now is, do you believe her? If you do, show it. Leave a comment. Encourage her. Let the world know we haven't forgotten. Click like to show you stand with Alana. Because one voice sparked a movement, and that voice still echoes. Waiting. Planning. Ready. She had never planned to be a symbol. Never asked to be a name on protest signs or a face in headlines. Dr. Alana Brooks just wanted to do her job, to fight crime, bring justice, and make her community safer. But life had other plans. And when her face flashed across millions of screens, wrists locked in cold silver handcuffs, eyes burning with dignity and pain, the world saw something much deeper than just an FBI official being racially profiled. They saw a woman who had spent her entire life climbing a mountain that was never meant for her to reach the top of. They saw the beginning of a story that no one could have predicted. And only now do we finally understand the full weight of what she faced. It started at JFK Airport, as you know, where 2 officers, filled with arrogance and ignorance, dragged her away in front of a crowd, mocking her, doubting her identity, humiliating her for daring to look confident, successful, and black. The world was outraged. Videos went viral. The officers were fired. And Alana? She stood tall, made speeches, called for change. But that wasn't the end. That moment in the airport had opened a door. A dangerous, hidden door. And what was waiting on the other side would test her like nothing she had ever known. Because that arrest wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning. Alana soon discovered files buried deep within the system, evidence of a secret program known only to a few. Project Halberd. Its mission? Quietly suppress rising voices, especially those of color, who threatened the status quo. These weren't rogue incidents. They were orchestrated, deliberate, calculated. The airport stop? One of many. Dozens of officials, judges, activists, all targeted, all quietly erased from public memory. At first, Alana didn't believe what she was seeing. But as she followed the trail, dug into sealed documents, decrypted hidden memos, it all became horrifyingly clear. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed to. And then things got worse. Her computer was hacked. Her security access was revoked. People she trusted stopped answering her calls. A message appeared in her inbox. Walk away while you still can. But Alana didn't walk away. She couldn't. Not after what she'd seen. Not after what she'd lived through. Not when so many others had been silenced without a voice. So she did the only thing she could. She disappeared. She left behind her apartment, her office, her title. For months, no one knew where she was. But in that time, she was working. Quietly. Desperately. Courageously. She reached out to whistleblowers, hacked into encrypted servers, pieced together fragments of hidden data. She slept in safe houses, changed identities, used burner phones. Every day was a risk. Every step a gamble. But she kept going. Because the deeper she dug, the more horrifying the truth became. She found evidence of secret surveillance programs that had followed her and others for years. Lists of names, people marked as potential disruptors, simply for demanding justice. Audio files of backroom meetings where high-ranking officials laughed about cleaning up the noise. And worst of all, she found out her arrest wasn't spontaneous. It had been greenlit. They knew exactly who she was that day at the airport, and they wanted her silenced. But Alana Brooks wasn't someone you could silence. She was someone you underestimated. Until it was too late. She collected everything: evidence, testimonies, digital trails. But getting the truth out wouldn't be easy. News outlets were scared. Editors were threatened. One journalist who agreed to meet her found their car tampered with the next day. The message was clear. This dies here. Still, Alana kept going. She coordinated with a network of activists, rogue journalists, and former federal insiders. She sent out data in pieces, encrypted, anonymously, waiting for the moment to strike. And then she recorded a video. Just one. No makeup, no lights, just her in a dim room, eyes tired but fierce. "If you're watching this," she said, "I may not have much time, but you deserve to know the truth. What happened to me at JFK wasn't just about me. It was about you. It was about a system that punishes those who rise too far, too fast, with too much courage in their voice. But I'm not afraid anymore, because the truth is bigger than me. And it's time it comes to light." The video dropped like a bomb. Within hours, it spread to millions. Journalists confirmed the data. Investigations began. Congressional hearings were demanded. The entire country turned its eyes toward the dark underbelly Alana had exposed. And suddenly, all the people who once ignored her, doubted her, feared her, they had to listen. But behind the scenes, Alana was still in danger. One night, while trying to reach a contact, she was followed. She ducked into a subway station, heart pounding, only to find herself cornered by two men in plain clothes. They didn't say anything, just stared at her. But she stared right back. Because she wasn't the same woman they thought they could intimidate. She had risked everything. There was nothing left to lose. She escaped that night. But the encounter left scars, not just on her body, but on her spirit. And yet, despite it all, she won. The files she released led to indictments. Multiple agencies were forced to admit cover-ups. Officers were unmasked. Victims' families received apologies, some for the first time. The term Project Halberd became a national scandal. Laws were rewritten, protocols changed, new oversight systems installed, and at the center of it all, Alana. Eventually, she emerged. Not with flash, not with fury, just quiet grace. She gave one final interview, her first public appearance in over a year. She looked straight into the camera and said, "I didn't do this because I was brave. I did this because I was tired. Tired of watching others suffer while I stayed silent. Tired of a system that took everything and gave nothing. Tired of waiting for change that never came." Ire rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "I faced fear, betrayal, and the kind of isolation I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I never gave up, because if I had, then they would have won. And too many people before me fought too hard to let that happen." Her voice broke, just for a second. "But now the world knows." And the world did. Her story inspired protests, books, films, legislation. But more than that, it inspired hope. Hope that one voice could make a difference, that truth, no matter how long it's buried, can rise. And that the fight for justice is never really over. But it's always worth it. So now you know the truth. Now you understand the cost she paid, the pain she carried, the nights she didn't sleep, the dangers she faced alone. She walked through fire, not for herself, but for all of us. And if her story touched your heart, if it made you cry, or made you angry, or made you believe again, then don't let it fade. Click the like button, not just for her, for everyone who's been silenced, for everyone still fighting. Leave a comment. Let her know she's not alone. Tell her she mattered. Subscribe for more stories like this, for truth, for courage, for hope. Because Dr. Alana Brooks didn't just survive injustice, she turned it into a revolution. And now, she's not just a symbol, she's a legacy. She used to believe that truth would always rise, that no matter how deep the system tried to bury it, it would claw its way to the surface. Dr. Alana Brooks believed in the law, in justice, in the strength of perseverance. She had built a life on that belief. She had earned her position at the FBI through years of sacrifice, late nights, missed birthdays, and battles in rooms where she was the only black woman in a sea of men who doubted her. And still, she had risen. But nothing, not the degrees, not the accolades, not the title, could protect her from what happened at JFK Airport that cold morning. She had passed through security like everyone else. She was dressed in the kind of suit that said she had earned her place in every room she entered. But none of that mattered to the two white officers who stopped her. In their eyes, she wasn't Dr. Brooks. She was just a black woman who didn't know her place. They mocked her, doubted her ID, cuffed her in front of strangers. And in that moment, everything she had worked for shattered. But that was just the beginning. The cameras caught the scene. The media exploded. People were outraged. The officers were suspended. then fired. She became a symbol, a voice for the voiceless. Her story inspired protests, interviews, reform panels. She stood on stages and spoke with poise. She talked about racial profiling, systemic injustice, abuse of power. But behind the public face, Alana was crumbling. Because while the world applauded, something darker was unfolding beneath the surface, something no one saw coming. After the incident, she started asking questions. Too many questions. Why was her arrest logged under a restricted incident code? Why were the officers' body cameras turned off before they approached her? Why had she received a warning email, anonymous and chilling, just days before the arrest that read, "Silence is survival"? She didn't understand it at first, but as she dug deeper, what she found would change everything. A string of files, hidden in a protected database, hinted at something far bigger, Project Halberd. She didn't know what it meant. There were no official records, but what she uncovered terrified her. Black professionals, activists, judges, even fellow agents, each had faced sudden accusations, character assassination, or unexplained incidents. Some had quietly left their posts. Some had vanished from public view entirely. It was as if there was an invisible net cast over anyone who rose too high or spoke too loudly. Alana realized her arrest hadn't been a mistake. It was a message. She tried to take her findings to internal affairs, but they shut her down, warned her to let it go for her own safety. Even colleagues she trusted turned cold. "You're jeopardizing your future," they said. "You've already made your point." But it wasn't enough for her. Not when the truth was still buried. Not when others had been silenced before her. Then came the threats. Her car was keyed. Her home surveillance glitched. Twice, her office computer crashed, and when it rebooted, her case files were wiped. She began to feel watched, followed. She was forced to change her routes, switch phones, encrypt every email. Fear began to creep into her bones, the kind of fear that doesn't scream, but whispers, the kind you carry in your chest, in the space between heartbeats. Still, she kept going. She traced anonymous documents to a secret federal project that flagged high-risk disruptors, mostly black or brown individuals in positions of influence who had radical leanings, defined vaguely as speaking out against the system. She found records of court cases manipulated, testimonies suppressed, careers ruined. She was on that list. The weight of it nearly broke her. Alana had spent her whole life trying to be the one who made a difference from within. She had played by the rules, risen through the ranks, kept her voice measured. But none of it mattered. Not to those who saw her skin before they saw her soul. Not to those who viewed justice as a threat when spoken by the wrong mouth. One night, she sat alone in a safe house, staring at the documents in front of her. Proof of systemic rot so deep it infected everything. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred. She had risked everything, her job, her safety, her sanity. She thought of walking away, letting it go. No one would blame her. But then she remembered the girl in the front row of her last speech, eyes wide with admiration. "You make me feel like I can be anything," the girl had said. That's when Alana knew. She couldn't stop, even if it cost her everything. She recorded one final video. Her voice was raw. Her eyes were tired, but unflinching. "If anything happens to me," she said, "know this wasn't just about me. Know this is bigger than one woman, bigger than one airport. I've seen the machine. I've seen how it silences truth. But not this time. Because this time, I'm not alone. This time, the world is watching." She sent the video and the files to a trusted reporter, Hours later, it was everywhere. The public erupted. The documents confirmed a decades-long covert operation targeting minority leaders. It was real. It was horrifying. And it was deliberate. Investigations were launched. Hearings held. Retired officials called to testify. The system couldn't ignore her anymore. She had ripped the veil off a nightmare the nation didn't want to face. But it came at a cost. Alana's name was dragged through the mud. News pundits questioned her sanity. She was called a liar, a traitor, a conspiracist. She lost friends. Family grew distant. The bureau placed her on leave. Death threats flooded in. Her face was on every screen, but she had never felt more alone. Yet in the quiet moments, something else arrived. Letters, emails, messages from strangers, survivors, mothers who had lost sons, young girls who dreamed of being like her. One message simply read, "You gave me courage." That's what kept her going. She testified before Congress. She told the world everything. And when it was over, when the reports confirmed her findings, when the denials turned into apologies, she didn't celebrate. She cried, not for herself, but for everyone who had never gotten the chance to speak, for every voice that had been drowned out. Justice came slowly, but it came. Laws were changed. Officers fired. Compensation offered. A national task force was formed, named after her, the Brooks Integrity Initiative. She was offered her job back. She refused. Instead, she founded a nonprofit, trained young black lawyers, mentored future leaders. She used her pain to build something bigger than herself, something lasting, something true. But the scars remain. Even now, there are days she walks through crowds and hears whispers, days when the fear returns. But she walks anyway. Because the truth is, Dr. Alana Brooks wasn't just a victim. She was a force. She turned injustice into impact. She took a system built to break her and cracked it open for the world to see. And now, as her story echoes across courtrooms, classrooms, and living rooms, the world understands what she endured, what she faced, what she risked, and what she gave, so the truth could live. If this story moved you, if you felt her pain, her fear, her strength, click like. Let her know you were listening. Let her know she's not alone. Leave a comment. Tell her she mattered, that what she did meant something. Subscribe, because stories like hers deserve to be told, because truth should never be silenced, and because somewhere out there, another Alana Brooks is watching, waiting for a reason to believe she can fight too. She stood on the courthouse steps, the wind brushing her curls gently across her cheeks, eyes locked on the crowd of reporters and supporters below. The cameras flashed, microphones pointed upward, all waiting, expecting one final statement. But Dr. Alana Brooks didn't speak right away. She closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the memories flood in. Not to drown her, but to remind her of how far she'd come. From the cold, humiliating handcuffs at JFK Airport, to becoming the woman who broke open the doors of a system that had tried to crush her. Her journey had been long, brutal, and deeply painful. But in the end, she hadn't just survived. She had won. After months in hiding, after leaking the files of Project Halberd, after testifying before Congress and facing national ridicule, Alana's story had changed the nation. The task force she helped inspire, the Brooks Integrity Initiative, was now law. Several corrupt officials were removed. Reforms were passed in police departments across the country. Racial profiling policies were rewritten. Transparency was no longer optional, and across cities and towns, people of color who had been silenced now had legal paths to justice, their voices finally heard. But this wasn't a victory born out of luck or strategy. It was born from suffering and sacrifice. Because behind every policy changed, every system reformed, was a woman who had almost lost everything. Her name had been dragged through the mud, her life threatened, her mental health tested. She had cried alone in safe houses, eaten cold dinners in silence, looked over her shoulder for weeks at a time. She had fought battles most never saw, nights when she questioned herself, moments when she asked, "Is this worth it? Will anyone even care?" But someone did care. The little girl in the front row of her speech, the mother who wrote to her saying her son was wrongfully detained and now had hope. The young black attorney who said, "Because of you, I didn't quit." They cared. And that was enough. When Alana finally stepped up to the microphone, the crowd fell completely silent. "I didn't come here today to celebrate," she began, her voice calm and firm, but warm. "Because this journey didn't start with joy. It started with pain. It started with 2 officers who decided that the color of my skin made me suspicious. It started with humiliation. But I'm standing here today because I refused to let that moment define me." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I've learned that when the system doesn't protect you, you become your own shield. That when your voice shakes, it doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're fighting. And if I've learned anything, it's this: no change ever comes from silence." The applause came slowly at first, then built into a powerful wave. But Alana wasn't done. "There's someone watching this right now, someone going through something hard, something unfair. You feel invisible. You feel tired. You wonder if speaking up will even matter. Let me tell you something. It will. It may cost you. It may scare you. But your truth has power, and the world needs it." The reporters captured every word. But the real message wasn't for the headlines. It was for you. This story, Alana's story, isn't just about a woman who stood up to injustice. It's about how she did it. With grace, with intelligence, with perseverance. It's about what happens when someone refuses to be broken, even when the system does everything it can to shatter them. And the lesson? We all have moments in life when we're misunderstood, overlooked, doubted. Maybe not in a courtroom, maybe not on national news, but in our jobs, in our schools, in everyday interactions where someone sees our skin, our accent, our gender, our past, and assumes we don't belong. But like Alana, we can prove them wrong. Not with rage, but with resilience. Not with bitterness, but with boldness. It's not always about changing the whole world overnight. Sometimes it's about holding on to your truth for one more day, about doing the next right thing, even when it's hard. And if enough of us do that, we shift the world, little by little. That's what Alana did. She didn't just break silence. She built something better in its place. In the final moments of her press conference, someone asked her, "What's next for you?" Alana smiled. Not a performative smile, not a political one, but a genuine, quiet, peaceful smile. "I'm going to rest, and then I'm going to teach. I want to help others rise, because I know what it feels like to stand alone in the dark, and I don't want anyone else to feel that way again." With that, she stepped away from the microphone, walked down the stairs, and into a crowd of supporters waiting to hug her, hold her, thank her. She didn't need to say another word. The work had been done, and the world had changed, because one woman didn't back down. And now, it's your turn. If her story moved you, if you felt her pain, her courage, her fire, don't let it end here. Click the like button to show that truth matters. Leave a comment for Alana. Tell her she's not alone. Tell her she's inspired you. Subscribe to the channel, because more stories like this deserve to be told. Stories of bravery. Stories of truth. Stories of everyday people doing extraordinary things. Because every time you share these stories, you become part of the change. You become part of her legacy. And maybe one day, someone will tell your story too. So keep going, keep speaking, keep standing, and always remember, silence may protect you for a moment. But truth? Truth can protect generations.